The studio lights burned hot, but Clint Eastwood barely noticed. He sat upright at the table, hands folded, the familiar calm etched into his face like something carved from old stone. At 90+ years of living, he had learned how to sit inside silence, how to let rooms reveal themselves before he ever spoke. The View studio, however, was not a quiet place. It hummed with rehearsed energy, applause cues taped to the floor, producers pacing behind the cameras, assistants counting seconds with raised fingers. The audience buzzed too, whispering his name, some with reverence, some with curiosity, all aware they were watching a living legend share a couch usually reserved for lighter conversations. Joy Behar leaned forward, her smile practiced, eyes bright with the confidence of someone who knew how to command a room. She welcomed him warmly enough, praising his career, listing his films, reminding viewers of his decades-long presence in Hollywood. Clint nodded politely, offering brief thanks, the corners of his mouth barely lifting. He'd done this dance before: sit, listen, answer, leave. He expected nothing more, but then Joy pivoted. She mentioned how Hollywood was changing, how some icons from earlier eras struggled to keep up with the times. Her tone was casual, joking even, but the words landed heavier than intended. The audience laughed on cue, a ripple of sound that bounced off the walls. Clint's eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back to Joy. He said nothing. He waited. Joy continued, warming to her point. She joked about grumpy old men in the industry, about politics, about how some stars just couldn't let go of outdated ideas. She didn't say his name, not directly, but she didn't have to. The implication hovered in the air, thin but unmistakable. Clint shifted slightly in his chair, uncrossing and recrossing his hands, his expression still calm, still controlled. When he finally spoke, the shift in the room was immediate. His voice was low, steady, and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't compete for attention because it assumed it already had it. He talked about time, about perspective, about how change didn't always mean improvement. He spoke about listening before judging, about earning opinions through experience rather than applause. There was no anger in his words, just firmness, like a door closing gently but completely. The laughter faded. A few audience members nodded. Others sat stiffly, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Joy tilted her head, her smile tightening. She responded quickly, her tone sharper now, defending the importance of calling out harmful ideas, of not giving passes to people simply because they were legends. Her words came faster, overlapping his pauses, filling the space he left behind. Clint didn't interrupt. He waited again. That patience seemed to irritate her more than any rebuttal could have. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and tossed out another remark, something about relevance, about knowing when to step aside. The studio lights felt brighter suddenly, harsher. One of the other hosts glanced toward the producers, sensing the temperature rising. When Clint answered this time, his jaw tightened just enough to notice. He spoke about respect, not as a buzzword, but as a principle. He talked about the difference between disagreement and dismissal, about how conversation died the moment people stopped seeing one another as human beings. His words were calm, but there was steel underneath them, decades of authority earned the hard way. Joy laughed again, but it rang hollow. She pushed back harder now, her voice lifting, the rhythm of a debate replacing the casual banter the show thrived on. The audience murmured. A camera operator adjusted position, sensing something unscripted was unfolding. In the control room, producers exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. Clint shifted forward in his seat, elbows resting lightly on his knees. He looked directly at Joy, not with hostility, but with a kind of weary clarity. He spoke about being talked down to, about how easy it was to mock people once they were labeled relics. He reminded the table that progress built itself on the backs of those who came before it. His words weren't loud, but they carried, filling the room in a way laughter never could. The applause that followed was scattered, hesitant. Joy's expression hardened. She fired back, interrupting him this time, accusing him of romanticizing the past, of refusing to acknowledge harm done by old systems. Her voice echoed just a beat too long, pushing past the boundaries of polite television. The tension was no longer subtle. One of the hosts tried to interject, offering a bridge, a softer question, but it dissolved under the weight of the moment. Clint straightened, his face unreadable. He took a breath, slow and measured, the kind of breath taken before saying something that couldn't be unsaid. Around them, the studio seemed to shrink. The audience leaned forward. A producer's voice crackled urgently through an earpiece. This was no longer just an interview. It was a collision, between eras, between temperaments, between two people unwilling to yield ground. And as Clint opened his mouth again, the room braced itself, knowing the conversation had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. The breath Clint took seemed to stretch time. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't theatrical, but it carried the weight of a decision already made. He looked around the table, at the faces angled toward him, some sympathetic, some tense, some calculating how this would play online by the end of the hour. When he spoke, his voice cut through the low hum of the studio like a clean line drawn in dust. "I didn't come here to be lectured," he said evenly. "And I didn't come here to play a character." His eyes returned to Joy, steady and unblinking. "I came to talk. That requires respect on both sides." The audience went quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly surprised by the firmness of his tone. She recovered quickly, offering a half smile and a shrug, suggesting he was taking things too personally. The words were meant to diffuse, but they landed like fuel. Clint pushed his chair back an inch, then another. The sound of metal legs scraping against the floor seemed amplified in the silence. One of the hosts reached out instinctively, palm open, as if to steady the moment. "Let's all take a breath," she said, voice light, almost pleading. But the rhythm of the show was broken now. There was no sliding back into safe territory. Joy leaned forward again, this time with a sharper edge. She spoke about accountability, about platforms, about how public figures didn't get to opt out of criticism just because they felt uncomfortable. Her words came fast, practiced, honed by years of debate. The audience responded with scattered applause, unsure which side they were clapping for, or if they were clapping just to break the tension. Clint stood. It wasn't sudden, but it was definitive. He rose to his full height, straight-backed, composed, the movement drawing every camera toward him. A murmur rippled through the audience. Someone in the front row gasped. Joy froze mid-sentence, her eyebrows lifting as reality caught up with the moment. "I've spent my life having tough conversations," Clint said, his voice still calm, still controlled. "But I won't sit here and be talked down to for sport." He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow felt final. "This isn't a conversation anymore." A stage manager appeared at the edge of the set, eyes wide, whispering urgently into a headset. Off camera, producers scrambled, hands waving, voices overlapping. One of the hosts laughed nervously, trying to frame it as a misunderstanding, a passionate exchange. "Clint, wait," she said, standing halfway out of her chair. "Let's reset." He didn't look back at her. He reached for the microphone clipped to his jacket, paused, then simply left it where it was. The audience watched, transfixed, as he stepped away from the table. Joy finally found her voice, calling after him, insisting she hadn't meant any disrespect. Her words followed him across the stage, but they didn't slow his pace. As Clint walked off set, the cameras caught everything, the stunned expressions, the hosts exchanging glances, Joy sitting back in her chair, lips pressed tight. The applause that erupted was uneven, fractured, some clapping out of admiration, others out of sheer shock. A producer's voice cut in through the studio speakers, announcing an unscheduled commercial break. Behind the scenes, the air buzzed with chaos. Assistants rushed past one another, phones already out, scrolling, posting, sending messages. Clips were being cut in real time, the most volatile moments queued up for immediate release. Someone whispered, "This is going to explode," and no one disagreed. Clint moved down the hallway with the same steady pace he'd carried on set. A publicist jogged to catch up, asking if he wanted to issue a statement, reminding him of press protocols, of optics. He stopped once, turned slightly, and shook his head. "No statement," he said quietly. "I said what I needed to say." By the time he reached his car, the internet was already on fire. Social media feeds flooded with grainy clips and hot takes. Some hailed him as a symbol of dignity, standing his ground in a culture that thrived on confrontation. Others accused him of storming off when challenged, of proving the very point Joy had been making. Hashtags multiplied, arguments flared, and the moment replayed endlessly, slowed down, dissected frame by frame. Back in the studio, the hosts returned from commercial with forced smiles and carefully chosen words. Joy addressed the audience, clarifying her intentions, insisting the discussion had been misinterpreted. She laughed it off, but her eyes betrayed frustration. The show moved on, but the energy never fully recovered. Everyone knew what people would remember. That evening, News outlets picked up the story, headlines growing more dramatic with each retelling. Viral clash, explosive walk-off, a line crossed on live TV. Commentators debated whether Clint had been disrespected or whether he had refused to engage with necessary criticism. Panels formed, opinions hardened, sides were chosen. Clint, meanwhile, went home. He sat in his living room long after the sun went down, the television muted, the glow of headlines flickering silently across the screen. He didn't watch the clips. He didn't read the comments. He poured a drink, sat back, and stared out the window, the city lights distant and unfocused. The quiet felt earned. In the days that followed, requests poured in, interviews, statements, follow-ups. He declined them all. No apology, no clarification. The silence became its own message, one that frustrated critics and emboldened supporters alike. Weeks later, the moment still lingered in public memory, referenced whenever conversations turned to respect, generational divides, and the boundaries of televised debate. Joy spoke about it once more, insisting she welcomed tough conversations, that walking away wasn't the answer. Clint never responded, and in that absence of words, people found their own meanings. Some saw pride, some saw principle, others saw stubbornness, but everyone agreed on one thing. For a few unscripted minutes on live television, the mask of polite entertainment slipped, revealing something raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore.